And okay, it looks like we're live on Facebook now. So I want to welcome everyone to tonight's Know Your Rights series. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. Just give me a minute here. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Annabelle Santiago. I'm the grassroots coordinator with the Coalition for Social Justice. Thank you for joining us on our live today at our weekly Know Your Rights series. This series is brought to you by a number of different organizations and coalition partners in an effort to extend our reach and get you the information that you need in this moment. We will be covering a variety of issues week to week. You can catch us on Facebook Live or register through Zoom by finding the registration link on the Know Your Rights event page on the pages of the organizations that you see up on the screen. So the way that this will work is we'll start with a 10 to 15 minute presentation from Elizabeth Whiteway with time for question and answer toward the end. If you are on the Zoom call, you will remain muted until we go into questions, and also know that this is being recorded to be distributed for later use. I'm going to be fielding questions through the Facebook Live and through the chat function on the Zoom call. You may also use the raise hand function to ask your question. So today we have Elizabeth Whiteway back again for the second time. Yay! And Elizabeth's with Greater Boston Legal Services, and she is going to be covering the topic around your rights and benefits on emergency paid leave and sick time that was passed under the Families First Act. So I'm gonna give it right to Elizabeth.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Annabelle. And just want to make sure, can folks hear me okay? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and do this a PowerPoint slideshow to help folks understand what it is that we're talking about tonight. And so you'll know that these slides are going to be made available to you electronically. Annabelle can make sure that they're posted. Does this presentation look appropriate, Annabelle?
Yes.
Okay. Are you seeing the tiles on the left though?
Yeah, I think you have to put it in slideshow view.
Yeah, and I'm having trouble because of the bar is hidden. Wait a second. Sorry about this, folks. Okay. Okay, hold on a second.
Maybe if you minimize it, because the bar at the top is a drag.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I'll minimize that. I'll just put that away. Yeah. Okay. So here we are. Welcome. Thank you for your patience. This is a Know Your Rights training on the emergency paid sick leave and this expanded leave under the Federal Family Medical Leave Act that was created on March 18th, 2020. This is part of the Federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It's a mouthful. All this stuff is a mouthful. Can't be helped. Sorry about that. And of course, now what's going on, I cannot. Okay. All right. So what is the Federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act? It's part of a comprehensive congressional response to COVID-19. It was signed into law on the 18th of March. It became effective April 1st, and it will be valid through December 31st of this year. And there are two types of job protected time off with wage replacement. okay, that are available to employees unable to work due to COVID-19, okay? And the benefit is paid by your employer, and the employer gets reimbursed through a federal payroll tax credit after submitting appropriate documentation to the Internal Revenue Service. There's one type of leave. This is the emergency paid sick leave. The other is this expanded leave under the FMLA that I just mentioned. So what is this emergency paid sick leave? This is a whole new law. This is something that hasn't existed on the federal level. It's available to employees for immediate use, regardless of their duration of employment, which is really great. It entitles a full-time worker to up to 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave, and that this would be 10 full work days for someone who works 40 hours a week. If you're a part-time employee, then the employer looks at, well, what's your normal work schedule over 2 weeks? And then you would be reimbursed for that. The employer is always free to provide more job protected time off if they choose to do so. And the wage replacement under this act has to be the greater of your regular rate of pay, or if your regular rate of pay is not as high as, say, federal, state minimum or local minimum wage laws where you're employed, then you get that greater one. Though it's hard to imagine that. Though there are some, sub-minimum wage laws that apply. The wage replacement is lower if the leave that you're taking is to care for a member of your household. So what are the requirements? Like, what is it that will trigger this right? It has to be COVID-19 related. You have to be somebody for whom your employer has work for you to do, but you're not able to be at the work site and you're not able to telework, okay? And it's because you're either under a government order to quarantine or isolate because of COVID-19, or you've been advised by a healthcare professional to quarantine. Maybe you're showing symptoms and you're seeking diagnosis from a medical professional. And then here come the caregiving leaves, okay? This is, I need to care for a member of my household who's under a government order. So it's all those same reasons you're unable to work. Now it applies to this person who's a member of your household that you need to care for. Then there's the need to care for child because the child's at home, school is closed, daycare is unavailable, again, due to COVID-19. And then there's this sort of bucket at the end that is elaborated on in regulations that the Secretary of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Treasury will carve out if you're experiencing a substantially similar condition, okay? Now, the thing to take note of that represents a tremendous point of progress in all of our campaign efforts to expand rights to leave is the definition of individual under this Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, okay? When I'm taking time off under this act to care for an individual, this individual is broadly defined under the regulations. It's someone for whom I can take this leave because they're a member of my immediate family, someone with whom I share a home, or a similar person with whom I have a relationship that creates this expectation that the employee would care, I would care for that person if quarantined or in isolation. This is tremendous progress when we look at how people form families today. Okay, we all have our family of choice, people that depend on us and people upon whom we depend. And who are the covered and exempt employers? Covered employers include all public employers, no matter how many employees are on the payroll. So this is federal, state, county, local government employers. And then all private employers that have fewer than 500 employees. I want you to all take a note of that right now, because this is where current state law needs fixing, and we have a bill that will do it, and we have a call to action at the end that we'd like your help with. Who are the exempt employers? Well, all private employers that have 500 or more employees, healthcare and emergency responder employers, or select employees employed by them. So that means maybe not all of my hospital employees are exempt. Maybe the nurses and the doctors won't be. Maybe the intake workers won't be. Maybe the social workers won't be, but maybe I will exempt I won't exempt, say, somebody who, um, provides cleaning services. Employers with fewer than 50 employees whose viability is threatened by granting leaves for workers who have a child care or closed school issue. And then federal employers who are granted good cause exemptions by the Federal Office of Management and Budget. Keep those two exemptions in mind because they apply, we'll be hitting those again under the expanded FMLA. So what are the rules on wage replacement for the emergency sick leave? I already alluded to them before. Okay, it's the greater of your regular rate of pay or, the state, federal, or local minimum wage where you're employed. And it's capped at $511 a day, 5,110 total for 80 hours. Okay, for all leaves related to your own health condition, quarantine, or isolation. So again, this is just when you have an issue affecting your health and it's COVID-19 related, you're in quarantine, isolation, or seeking medical help, that's your wage replacement. But what if you're taking this time off to care for this covered individual, this family member, this person who's in your household or in your circle of care, basically? The wage replacement is 2/3 of that. It's capped at $200 a day and $2,000 total for 80 hours. And Annabelle, if I need to stop at any point to answer a question, you'll let me know. What are the additional rules that apply to the use of this emergency paid sick leave? Really important ones for workers, okay? All covered workers are protected from any and all forms of employer retaliation, and this would include demotion, firing, loss of seniority, reduction in pay. Just because you've requested it, you've used it, or you filed a complaint, maybe you testified on behalf of a fellow employee in an action charging the employer with violation of the law. The employer cannot compel you to exhaust other PTO before taking time off under this emergency law, this emergency sick time, and cannot compel you to find a replacement worker. Again, very important provisional. And a lot of workers will be told, oh yeah, sure, you can have that shift off. You just got to find somebody. Well, workers in this situation aren't going to have that luxury. They're not going to be able to do that. And they're not required to. If the employer provides health insurance, it continues while the worker's out. And it does not, reduce, diminish, or in any way impair a right that the employee already enjoys because of a collectively bargained agreement, a state or federal law, or an employer policy. Finally, now we know the law ends December 31st. What if it's extended? Well, that would be great. It may need to be. We'll wait and see. But if you've got unused emergency paid sick leave at the end of this year, you're not going to be allowed to carry it over. Okay, now we're talking about a whole different kind of leave. Okay, this is the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. And these are the basic provisions, okay? It amends the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. And it's effective, again, these same dates, April 1st through December 31st. The amendments pertain to the COVID-19 public health emergency needs only. Okay. And the job protected leave is provided with partial wage replacement for workers who cannot work or telework due to the need to care for a child who is at home because of the child school being closed or the daycare is unavailable. Now, one thing that will come up is that workers are going to be asked by the employers to provide information about the school closing or the child care being unavailable. You have to be mindful of the fact that employers are not going to get the federal tax credit, the payroll tax credit, unless they submit this information to the IRS. So while it feels a little intrusive and maybe a little threatening, and it's actually very difficult for people to do if they have informal child care arrangements and their child care provider isn't reporting the income. I've had some clients who just said, look, I'm not even going to do it because I have a great relationship with my kid's child care provider and I don't want to go down that road. So there are people in that situation. The child can be age 18 or older, okay, if incapable of self-care due to mental or physical disability. But what we're seeing now is this is sort of the much more narrow definition of child under the FMLA. So it's birth, adoption, a ward of yours, or someone who's, stood, for whom you stood in loco parentis, meaning when this individual was growing up, I was like the mother or the father. So if your employer does not have any work for you, that's a lack of work. And what you've got to do at that point is, rather than seek any job protection, wage replacement under this act, you apply for unemployment insurance, which we covered a couple of weeks ago. So what are some of the rules that apply to this expanded act? The employees, unlike the sick time emergency COVID protections, right? You've got to be on the payroll for 30 days before you claim the leave. The leave provided is up to 12 weeks. First 10 days of leave are unpaid, though presumably what you would do is you would use the emergency paid sick time for the first 10 days, and then you would use the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act for the balance. The wage replacement is not less than 2/3 of the average weekly wage, this time capped at $200 a day and $10,000 in the aggregate for each employee. And the employee's got to be restored. This is, again, this is just the FMLA. Okay, these are the existing provisions. The employee's got to be restored to a same or equivalent position after the leave. Now, here comes a change, though. This is an exception. But if you are employed by an employer with fewer than 25 employees, they're exempt from this requirement under certain circumstances. And it's like these three factors have to exist, okay? That the position doesn't exist due to economic changes related to COVID-19. The employer made reasonable efforts to restore the employee to that equivalent position, and the employer makes a reasonable effort to contact the employee within a year if the position's restored. Okay. So, and then what are these exemptions? Like, which employers aren't covered by this? Well, the Federal Office of Management and Budget has the regulatory authority to exempt federal agencies. And suffice it to say, the regulations are very detailed, and most federal employees aren't eligible for this. They have other leave benefits available to them in general. If the employer has fewer than 50 employees and can show good cause economic hardship for not granting the leave. So this is the economic viability test, which is detailed in the regulations, and it has to do with the lack of this worker on the job site threatens my economic viability. So basically, it would give that employer the permission to say, I get it, you can't show up. However, I don't have to keep your job for you, and I can apply, hire somebody else to replace you. And then the good cause exemption, which is really huge, okay, for healthcare providers and emergency responders. So on the one hand, we all understand why the healthcare providers and the emergency responders are so important during COVID-19. And yet we've also seen, we're all very well aware of the toll that this crisis is taking on these workers and that they need protection. We'll get to that in a minute. These workers, it's not, again, as I said earlier, it's not just the employers, okay, having the option, but the employers can actually, within reason, pick and choose which employees are going to be exempt. Okay, I just made a mistake and wait a second, I've got to go back. Sorry. Thanks for your patience. Okay. So what are the resources on this whole constellation of new laws, the emergency paid sick leave and this expanded emergency FMLA? This PowerPoint will be available. You'll be able to access these hyperlinks once it's posted online. The first link takes you to the act itself, the second to the relevant regulations that were issued by the Department of Labor. Then there's sort of a much more, I think, accessible general guidance that the Department of Labor has provided that you'll see in that third bullet. Our allies and friends at A Better Balance in New York City have an excellent fact sheet. Without them, it would be very hard for us to be doing this work in Massachusetts. you can refer to that fact sheet. It provides you with a lot of valuable information. And finally, the Massachusetts Attorney General has done a terrific job getting the word out to workers and helping them understand what their rights are. And that's a link to the page on the AGO's website. So what is it that you can do to help? Okay, as I mentioned earlier, there are these workers who aren't covered by the emergency sick time provisions. Now, this law that we're working on in Massachusetts, an act relative to emergency paid sick time, covers emergency paid sick time only. It doesn't cover that big bucket of leave under the expanded FMLA to take care of children who aren't in school or not able to go to daycare, okay? This is the 80 hours that we're talking about. So who's covered here? Well, the employers with more than 500 or more employees, for example. So what we're saying here in this law is we want to protect those workers in Massachusetts. So please help us get this law passed by accessing these links. It will help you get the word to your legislators that you want them to pass this act and get it out of committee with a favorable report. Okay, so let's just see. So yeah, thanks for participating. There's my contact information, and I'll stop the screen share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I just wanted to say to everyone, I did share the action links in the chat of all of the lives and on Zoom. One question, Elizabeth, is because there are workers who have access to these benefits, how do they go about like actually going ahead and taking the leave that they need?
Well, first, they've got to just notify their employer that they've got a need, and then the employer. Now, what's happening right now, unfortunately, is there are a lot of employers who aren't sure, like, oh, am I covered by this? I mean, you know, the exemptions are pretty clear. Like if you're working for a big box department store, you're likely not covered because they have more than 500 employees. They are a private employer and they have more than 500 employees. If you are not working for like an emergency response employer or a healthcare provider, and you're working for a private employer that has fewer than 500 employees, you should be covered by this, okay, by the federal law. And then if you're working for, you know, a state or local government, you should also be covered by it.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat. What happens if this occurred in the beginning of the pandemic and they went without pay in the beginning? Is it retroactive?
You could ask your employer about that. I would go to, I mean, that's a violation. If you're covered and, you know, for example, like the fact that you weren't aware of it doesn't relieve your employer of the obligation to provide the benefit to you. Okay. So what you need to do is go speak with your employer and say, gee, I just learned about this law. Based on everything I understand, I should have gotten paid for this. And I'd really like you to, you know, hey, submit the request for the payroll tax credit with the IRS and pay me the time off. So I would just go right to the employer and ask. And you can also contact the Attorney General's office if you believe that there's been a violation of the FFCRA. Now, while the Attorney General doesn't have any enforcement powers, this really has to be enforced by the Department of Labor. It's not bad to get them involved, and they'll give you some good advice.
We got a thank you for answering that. Any other questions folks may have? Again, I'm keeping track of the Facebook Live and also the Zoom. So feel free to put your questions in. I'm going to just do a quick round and see if there are any questions coming through. right.
Okay.
So I think that is it. Um, Elizabeth, I guess just the last thing to close out the video. I always like to close out the video. How can people contact you again?
Oh,
Do you have
yes.
any questions?
Do you want me to share the slideshow again with my contact info? Or do you want me to put it in the chat? How would you like to do it? They can contact me at Greater Boston Legal Services. Okay, so my phone number is 617-603-1626. And my email address is ewhiteway@gbls.org. And once you post the PowerPoint, my contact information will be accessible there as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm so glad that we had you on again to share this really important information with people. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us on Zoom and in our live. And I guess we'll catch each other next week again, Wednesday, 6:30. Next week we will be covering your voting rights. So have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annabelle, for organizing this.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank